We read The Political Classroom by Diana E. Hess and Paula McAvoy. The main ideas of this book was that politics need to be talked about in the classroom to encourage a democratic society, especially where there isn't a diversity of political opinions. So pretty much a lot of teachers will shy away from politics in the classroom because they are worried they can be divisive or create tension or uncomfortable feelings in the classroom. And while that is often cases and oftentimes true, politics need to be in the classroom because we do live in a democratic society where students are expected to be involved in politics and involved in democracy. Kind of going along with the second point is that students have grown up in a politically polarized time, so they have a bad taste for politics and political institutions. This book really focuses on studies that were done between 2005 and 2009 when politics in America became very polarized. So these students that they're talking to and the students that we're going to have in our classrooms, they have a bad taste for politics. So we need to be able to bring politics into the classroom so we can kind of change that bad taste in their mouth. Because if students are afraid of politics, then they're not going to be involved in politics and our society will not be able to thrive. The third main idea is don't be afraid to get political, but always present all sides of the issue. So teachers in a classroom won't talk about politics because they are worried that their own opinions are going to be an influencer and they're going to polarize their students. That is a valid concern, but one that isn't worthy of not talking about politics. It's okay to be political as long as you're a fair and neutral judge on the issues.
And Hess and McAvoy actually found that in their research that the classrooms that had what they called best practice discussion, which means that they talked about issues openly and fairly and weren't afraid to talk about polarizing issues, they found that those best practice discussion classrooms actually resulted in students that were more interested in politics, and they also found that those students were more likely to intend on voting in the future and to be involved in politics. So not shying away from politically polarizing issues is actually better for the students than not talking about them at all. So one of the strengths of this book is that it's entirely research based. They based them around 3 case studies, in all 3 case studies were slightly different in their political backgrounds. So Adams High was it was a suburban public school that was pretty in the middle as far as politics goes. Mr. Kushner's classroom was very left-leaning, and then Mr. Walter's classroom was very conservative. It was actually an evangelical Christian school. So they studied a wide variety of political ideologies and a wide variety of political environments. And each case study, they tried to use a different method. They tried to talk about how those methods affected the students. In the first one, they had a legislative simulation involving all of the senior class where they all created this sort of mock Congress, mock legislature, where they voted on issues, they discussed them, they had to present arguments and solutions for the common good. The second one in Mr. Kushner's classroom, it was mostly discussion based. They talked about developing what they called political friendship, meaning the ability to get along politically even though they might have held different views. And then in Mr. Walter's class, they talked about what they called bounded autonomy, where Mr. Walters tried to develop a classroom that could have political independence, meaning they didn't have to subscribe to a particular political ideology, but could still maintain their Christian faith. So that was very important there. Another strength of this book is that while talking about those case studies, the authors discuss both the positive and the negative aspects of the teaching method. They weren't afraid to admit that their method wasn't completely flawless, but they were willing to talk about those weaknesses. But a weakness of it in return is that they didn't always talk about solutions to those negative aspects that they brought up. They were good at pointing out where things could falter, but they weren't good at talking about how they could solve those. So as one example, they talk about how, like I said, about those best practice classrooms, that they were more likely to produce engaged students. But they also mentioned findings that showed that social class differences also played a big role in whether students became politically engaged adults. So it was good for them to mention that, but they didn't mention how that inequality of outcomes really plays out and how teachers can overcome that.
How this contributes to our understanding is the 3 case studies help us see the methods in action in different political ideologies. So we can look at the 3 classrooms and see how we can use those in our classrooms, because oftentimes we are going to have classrooms that are extremely conservative or extremely liberal, or like in Adams High, that kind of purple classroom, that mixed classroom. So if we can go through these and pull out the ideas that they used and how they tackled some of the tougher issues in all 3 of those classrooms, that can help us when we're teachers and we are needing to tackle those same issues. So for applications of this, one of the main thing is we can use current events in the classroom even if they are political. Kind of tying this back into the methods that we've learned in class, a lot of things we've talked about are having discussions about current events. Students are really interested in current events and they want to talk about these things. And if we shy away from these issues because we see them as political and potentially harmful in the classroom, then we're gypping our students on an opportunity to learn. We can do kind of discussion-based learning and inquiry with these, and also we can bring in higher order thinking connections, like making connections between historical events and events that are happening currently. And then as teachers, what to do with our political opinions is another application that this book kind of helps us go through. One of the main things it talks about is you need to remain fair and be even on all sides. But sometimes they said in their research they've seen teachers say their political opinion on a certain issue, and sometimes they haven't on a certain issue. And it really goes both ways. You have to judge it by the situation. Sometimes it can help the class if you're not able to fully defend another opinion that's not yours. Sometimes it just helps to be open with what your opinion is.
So our idea of application that we thought about employing in our own classrooms would be requiring the students to get involved in local politics in some way. And we could give them this list, but they would be free to come up with their own ideas as well. But some things we thought of were attending town hall meetings, city council meetings, volunteering on a political campaign in their area, and contacting their congressperson to talk about an issue. All of these require them to do something outside the classroom that has real-world application and real-world consequences. And we would invite them to ask questions, when they attend those meetings, to ask questions, to present issues, and to not be afraid to carefully articulate their own political opinions.
A big idea of this book is that they want to bridge the scary gap between the classroom and politics, and this is a really good way to do it. To get your students involved in kind of low-level politics and just starting out to see how they can be involved in a democratic society and how they can get civically engaged, which is one of the main focuses that we have as social studies teachers. We need to make sure that our students are being civically engaged, and this is a really good idea to help them.
And we should also mention this has a lot of relevance to what we've talked about in class with inquiry learning. This is a great example of inquiry learning because it requires students to do research on their own, to base their research around essential questions, and that there isn't always one right answer, especially with politics.
Mm-hmm. We definitely recommend reading this book. It's super interesting, especially if you're going to be a government or history teacher. 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Agreed.